The old cargo ship dropped out of hyperspace, with a violent shudder that made the metal walls groan and cry out like a wounded animal. Princess Azereth Valkathos stood at the viewport and watched as the stars stopped spinning and became still points of light against the endless black void of space. She had not seen this part of the galaxy in 20 years, not since she was a frightened child being smuggled away from her home in the middle of the night while fire and screams filled the palace halls behind her. "We are here," she whispered, and her voice carried a weight of emotion she could not name. Behind her, a chair creaked as a man rose to his feet and walked to stand beside her. Commander Marcus Cole was not a tall man by human standards, and he was certainly not impressive when compared to the elegant and towering Valathi species that ruled this part of space. He stood just under 6 feet, with gray hair cut short and a face that carried the marks of countless battles fought across dozens of worlds. A scar ran from his left eyebrow down to his jaw, and his knuckles were rough and hardened from years of fighting. But his eyes were what made people nervous, for they held a calm and patient intelligence that spoke of a man who had seen everything the universe could throw at him and had survived it all. "The Valath Dominion," Marcus said, as he looked out at the distant stars that marked the border of the great alien empire. "Never thought I would come here on purpose." Azereth turned to look at her guardian, the man who had found her starving on a lawless fringe world when she was barely 15 years old. He had taken her in without asking questions, had fed her and protected her, and taught her how to survive in a galaxy that wanted her dead. He was more of a father to her than any memory she had of the Valathi royal court. "You do not have to come with me," she said softly. "This is my fight and my burden to carry." Marcus let out a short laugh that held no humor in it at all. "Kid, I have been watching your back for 20 years, he said. "You think I'm going to stop now just because we are walking into the most dangerous place in the known galaxy?" Before Azereth could respond, the ship's warning system began to flash red and a loud alarm filled the cabin. "Incoming vessels," the computer announced in its flat, mechanical voice. "Valathi patrol fleet detecting and approaching." Marcus moved immediately to the control panel, and his hands flew across the buttons with practiced ease. 6 ships, he reported. "Military grade, heavily armed. They are hailing us." Azereth took a deep breath and straightened her spine the way her mother had taught her so many years ago. "Open the channel," she commanded. The view screen flickered and then displayed the face of a Valathi officer. The Valathi were beautiful in a cold and untouchable way, with skin that shimmered like pale silver and eyes that glowed with soft inner light. They stood 8 feet tall on average and moved with a grace that made other species look clumsy and rough. This officer looked at the cargo ship with obvious disgust on his perfect features. "Unidentified vessel," he said in a voice that dripped with contempt. "You have entered sovereign space of the Valath Dominion. State your identity and purpose, or you will be destroyed." "I am Princess Azereth Valkathos," she announced, and her voice rang out clear and strong. "Daughter of Queen Malathris, heir to the throne of stars. I have returned to claim my birthright." The officer's glowing eyes went wide with shock, and his silver skin seemed to grow even paler. "That is impossible," he stammered. "The princess died 20 years ago during the rebellion." "And yet, here I stand," Azereth replied. "Scan my biosignature if you doubt my words. The royal bloodline cannot be faked." There was a long moment of silence as the officer clearly consulted with someone off-screen. When he turned back, his expression had changed from contempt to something that mixed fear and wonder in equal measure. "The scans confirm your identity," he said slowly. "Forgive me, Your Highness. We will escort you to Sirith Prime immediately." "That would be acceptable," Azereth said with a nod. But then the officer's eyes moved past her and landed on Marcus, who stood quietly at the control panel with his hand resting casually on the plasma pistol at his hip. "What is that creature doing on your vessel?" the officer demanded, and his voice was sharp with disgust. "Is this primitive ape your servant?" Marcus did not react to the insult at all. He simply stood there with that calm, patient look in his eyes, the same look he always wore before violence was about to happen. "This man is Commander Marcus Cole," Ysera said, and her voice turned cold as ice. "He's my guardian and my protector. He has kept me alive for 20 years while your people assumed I was dead. You will treat him with respect or you will answer to me." The officer looked like he had swallowed something bitter, but he bowed his head in submission. "As you command, Your Highness," he said through clenched teeth. The view screen went dark, and Ysera let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. "Wow," Marcus said with a slight smile. "That went better than I expected. Nobody shot at us." "Give it time," Ysera replied. "We have not reached the palace yet." She turned back to the viewport and watched as the Valithi warships formed a protective formation around their tiny cargo vessel. Somewhere ahead, on a world of crystal spires and floating palaces, her mother lay dying and a tyrant waited to seize power. Lord Varric, her uncle, the man who had murdered her father and tried to murder her when she was just a child. He had spent 20 years believing she was dead and building his power in the shadows of the throne. Now she was coming home, and she was bringing something he had never expected. She was bringing a human. Marcus came to stand beside her again and placed a rough hand on her shoulder. "Whatever happens next," he said quietly, "you are not alone. You have never been alone." Ysera reached up and placed her hand over his. "I know," she whispered. "That is why I am not afraid." The ships jumped to hyperspace and carried them toward their destiny, toward a throne that waited and a battle that would shake the foundations of an empire. The lost princess had returned, and the galaxy would never be the same. The investigation into the assassins led nowhere, as Marcus had expected. Every trail vanished into shadow. Every witness suddenly forgot what they had seen, and every piece of evidence crumbled to dust before it could be examined. Lord Varric expressed his shock and outrage at the attack on his beloved niece, and he promised that the guilty parties would be found and punished. But his eyes told a different story when he thought no one was watching. Marcus saw the truth in those cold blue depths, the frustrated anger of a predator whose prey had escaped his trap. The failed assassination had only made things more dangerous. Varric could not risk another direct attack so soon after the first, not with the eyes of the entire court watching for signs of treachery. So he chose a different path, one that was perfectly legal and absolutely deadly. 3 days after the attack, Lord Varric stood before the assembled nobles and invoked an ancient law that had not been used in over 1,000 years. "I call upon the right of succession," he declared in a voice that echoed through the great throne room. "Let the true heir to the throne of stars prove their worth through the sacred trials." A murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. The right of succession was an ancient tradition from the early days of the Dominion, a series of tests designed to prove that a claimant was worthy of ruling. It could not be refused without admitting weakness, and failure meant permanent exile from the line of succession. Ysera stepped forward with her head held high. "I accept the challenge," she said. "What are the terms?" Varric smiled like a predator who had finally cornered his prey. 3 trials, he answered. The trial of mind, to prove wisdom. The trial of voice, to prove diplomatic skill. And the trial of blood, to prove strength in combat. "The first 2 trials I will face myself," Ysera declared. "But the law allows me to name a champion for the trial of blood." "Indeed it does," Varric agreed. "And I have already named mine. General Sithraxis, step forward." The crowd parted as the most feared warrior in the Dominion walked into view. General Sithraxis was a monster of a creature, standing nearly 9 feet tall with 4 muscular arms and a body covered in natural armor that could stop plasma fire. He had fought in 100 wars and had never known defeat. His very name was spoken in whispers across the galaxy, a legend of violence and death. "And who will you name as your champion, little princess?" Varak asked with poisonous sweetness. "Which noble warrior will fight for your cause?" Azareth turned and looked directly at Marcus, who stood as always 2 steps behind her. "I name Commander Marcus Cole as my champion," she announced. The silence that followed was so complete that Marcus could hear his own heartbeat. Then the laughter began. It started as a few scattered chuckles and grew into a roaring wave of mockery that filled the throne room. Nobles pointed at Marcus and howled with amusement. Even Sithrixus looked down at the human with something like pity in his alien eyes. "A human?" Varak gasped between fits of laughter. "You name a human to face the greatest warrior our species has ever produced? This is a joke, surely." "I do not joke about matters of succession," Isareth replied coldly. The laughter slowly died as the court realized she was serious. "This is an insult," Sithraxis growled, and his 4 hands clenched into fists the size of human heads. "I have crushed armies beneath my feet. I have broken the backs of champions from a dozen worlds. And you send this small, soft creature to face me?" Marcus stepped forward and met the general's glare without flinching. "I have killed bigger," he said simply. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence held a different quality. Varak's smile had faded slightly, replaced by a shadow of uncertainty. "The trial will be held in 7 days," he declared. "May the worthy prevail." The news spread across the Dominion like fire through dry grass. The lost princess had returned, and she had chosen a human to fight for her life against the undefeated General Sithraxis. Most called it madness. Some called it surrender disguised as courage. But among the humans scattered throughout the Dominion, a different response began to take shape. They came to Marcus in secret. These humans who worked as servants and mechanics and laborers in a society that barely noticed their existence. They brought him information about Sithraxis, details gathered over years of quiet observation. The general favored his upper right arm due to an old injury that had never fully healed. He grew impatient when opponents refused to engage directly. He had a blind spot on his lower left side where his natural armor was thinner. Marcus listened to every word and committed it all to memory. "Why are you helping me?" he asked a young human woman who had brought detailed diagrams of Sithraxis's fighting style. "Because you are one of us," she replied, "and we look after our own." On the night before the trial, Isareth came to Marcus's quarters. Her composure, so perfect in public, finally cracked as tears streamed down her silver cheeks. "I cannot lose you," she whispered. "You are the only family I have ever truly known. If you die tomorrow because of my choice, I will never forgive myself." Marcus took her hands in his rough, calloused grip and looked into her glowing eyes. "Listen to me," he said firmly. "I have been fighting since before you were born. I have killed things bigger and meaner and uglier than Sithraxis. I have walked through fire and blood and come out the other side every single time. But he has never been defeated," Isareth protested. "Neither have I," Marcus replied. "Not when it mattered. Not when I had something worth fighting for." He pulled her into a hug, this alien princess who had become his daughter in every way that mattered. "I made you a promise 20 years ago," he said softly. "I promise to keep you safe no matter what. And I do not break my promises." Isareth held on to him tightly, drawing strength from his unshakable certainty. "What if you are wrong?" she asked. "What if this is the fight you cannot win?" Marcus smiled and pulled back to look at her face. "Then I will make sure he never forgets the day he faced a human," he said. "I will make him bleed for every inch." I will teach him and everyone watching that we do not surrender, we do not give up, and we never, ever stop fighting. He wiped the tears from her cheeks with gentle fingers. Now go get some sleep, he ordered. Tomorrow you need to watch me make history. Azareth laughed despite her fear and kissed his scarred forehead before leaving. Marcus sat alone in the darkness and thought about the fight to come. He had no illusions about what he faced. Sithrexis was faster, stronger, tougher, and more experienced than any opponent Marcus had ever fought. By every measure that mattered, the human should lose. But Marcus had learned something in his 50 years of life, something that the elegant and powerful Valathi had never understood. Humans were not the strongest species in the galaxy. They were not the fastest or the smartest or the most advanced. But they had something that made them dangerous beyond all reason. They simply refused to quit. Marcus checked his weapons one final time, then closed his eyes and waited for dawn. Tomorrow, the galaxy would learn what it meant to fight a human. The arena was ancient, a massive bowl of white stone that had stood for 10,000 years. 100,000 Valathi filled the seats. Their silver faces turned toward the sand below, where two figures stood at opposite ends. On one side stood General Sithraxis, a mountain of muscle and armor that seemed to block out the light itself. On the other side stood Marcus Cole, a single human with gray hair and scarred hands and nothing but his wits and his will to keep him alive. High above the arena floor, Azareth sat in the royal box with Lord Varric at her side. Her face was calm, but her hands gripped the armrests of her chair so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. "Your champion looks so small from up here," Varric whispered with cruel amusement. "I almost feel sorry for him." "Almost." Azareth did not respond. A horn sounded, and the crowd fell silent. The ancient voice of the arena master echoed across the sand. "Let the trial of blood begin." Sithraxis moved first. He charged across the arena like a living avalanche, his forearms spread wide and his battle cry shaking the very stones. Marcus did not try to meet the charge. He dove to the side at the last possible moment and rolled across the sand as Sithraxis thundered past. The general spun with surprising speed for his size and swung a massive fist at Marcus's head. Marcus ducked under the blow and drove his own fist into the spot on Sithraxis's lower left side where the armor was thin. The general grunted in surprise and swept his lower arms in a wide arc. Marcus jumped backward but was still caught by the edge of the blow. He flew through the air and crashed into the arena wall hard enough to crack the ancient stone. Pain exploded through his body, but he forced himself to his feet before Sithraxis could close the distance. "Stay down, little creature," the general advised. "I will make your death quick if you stop fighting." Marcus spat blood onto the sand and raised his fists. "I am just getting started," he replied. The crowd murmured in surprise. Any other opponent would have been finished by that single blow. But the human stood as if he had merely stumbled. Sithraxis attacked again, and again Marcus refused to meet him head-on. The human danced around the edges of the general's reach, ducking and weaving and taking blows that should have killed him but somehow did not. Every time Sithraxis thought he had the human cornered, Marcus would find some impossible angle of escape. And every time Marcus escaped, he would land another strike on that weak spot beneath the general's lower left arm. The blows were small, almost meaningless against such a massive opponent. But they added up. 5 minutes into a fight that everyone expected to last 30 seconds, blood began to drip from Sithraxis' side. The crowd grew restless. This was not how the fight was supposed to go. The human should be dead by now, broken and beaten on the sand. Instead, he kept moving, kept fighting, kept refusing to fall. "Why will you not die?" Sithraxis roared in frustration as another of his devastating blows found only empty air. "Humans do not know how to give up," Marcus gasped between ragged breaths. It is our greatest weakness and our greatest strength. He ducked under a sweeping arm and drove his elbow into the general's knee. Sithrixus stumbled for the first time. Marcus pressed the advantage, launching a flurry of strikes at every vulnerable point the human network had identified. Eyes, joints, old wounds, thin spots in the natural armor. None of the blows were powerful enough to cause serious damage on their own. But together they began to take their toll. 10 minutes into the fight, Sithraxis was bleeding from a dozen wounds. His movements had grown slower, his attacks more desperate. "This is impossible," the general growled. "You are nothing but a fragile little ape. How are you still standing?" Marcus grinned through bloody teeth. "I told you," he said. "We do not know how to quit. It is kind of our thing." He dodged another swing and landed a devastating kick to the same knee he had struck before. Sithraxis fell to one knee with a sound of grinding pain. The crowd had gone completely silent. High in the royal box, Lord Varric's face had turned pale with disbelief. This could not be happening. The mightiest warrior of the Dominion could not be losing to a human. But it was happening. Marcus pressed forward relentlessly, each strike more precise than the last. He was hurt badly, with broken ribs and blood streaming from cuts across his face and body. But he would not stop. He could not stop. Not when his Sereth's life hung in the balance. Sithraxis swung wildly with all four arms, desperation replacing skill. Marcus took a glancing blow to the shoulder that sent him spinning, but he used the momentum to drive his knee into the general's face. Sithraxis fell back, his glowing eyes dimming with shock and pain. "Yield," Marcus said as he stood over his fallen opponent. "The fight is over." For a long moment, Sithraxis stared up at the human who had done what no one else in the galaxy had ever accomplished. Then, slowly, the general lowered his head. "I yield," he said in a voice that carried across the silent arena. Marcus reached down and offered his hand to the defeated warrior. Sithraxis looked at the hand in confusion. "You would help me rise?" he asked. "After everything?" "You fought with honor," Marcus replied. "That deserves respect." Sithraxis took the hand and allowed Marcus to help him to his feet. "You are not what I expected, human," the general said quietly. "I understand now why she chose you." The silence in the arena shattered as a new sound began to rise. It started among the humans in the crowd, the servants and workers who had come to watch one of their own fight for his life. They began to cheer, and then, slowly at first but building like a wave, the Valithi joined them. The roar of the crowd washed over Marcus as he stood bloody and broken, but victorious on the ancient sand. He looked up at the royal box and saw Asereth on her feet with tears streaming down her face and her fist raised in triumph. But beside her, Lord Varric's face had twisted into something ugly and desperate. "No," Varric shouted, and his voice cut through the celebration like a knife. "This trial is void. I will not accept a human as a legitimate champion." He raised his hand and made a sharp gesture. Soldiers poured into the arena from every entrance, hundreds of them wearing the black armor of Varric's personal guard. They surrounded Marcus with weapons drawn and took up positions throughout the crowd. "This farce ends now," Varric declared. "I am taking control of the Dominion. Anyone who resists will be executed." The celebration turned to chaos as nobles screamed and fled. Marcus stood alone in a ring of enemies, too injured to fight his way free. But he smiled as he reached for the communicator, hidden beneath his torn clothing. "All stations," he said calmly. "This is Guardian Actual. Operation Bright Candle is go." Across Sirith Prime, in maintenance tunnels and engineering bays, and countless hidden corners, humans heard the call and answered. The real fight was about to begin. The lights went out across the arena as every power grid on Sirith Prime flickered and died. For 3 heartbeats, There was only darkness and the sound of panicked screams. Then the backup systems activated and dim emergency lighting revealed a scene of pure chaos. Lorax soldiers found themselves stumbling in the half-light while their communications crackled with nothing but static. "What is happening?" Varek shouted from the royal box. "Get the power back online." But the engineers who maintained the power systems were human. The technicians who ran the communication networks were human. The workers who knew every hidden passage and maintenance tunnel in the palace were human. And they had all been waiting for this moment. Marcus did not waste the opportunity. He moved through the confused soldiers like a ghost, striking from the shadows and vanishing before they could react. 3 guards fell before the others even realized they were under attack. "Protect the princess," Marcus shouted to the loyalist Valithi who had begun to rally. "Get her to the throne room." A group of palace guards broke through the chaos and surrounded Aserith, forming a protective barrier as they fought toward the exits. Marcus watched them go, then turned to face the soldiers who had recovered from their confusion and were now advancing on his position. There were too many of them. He was too injured to fight them all. But he did not need to win this battle. He only needed to buy time. "Come on, men," Marcus growled as he raised his fists. "Let us see what you have got." The fight was brutal and desperate. Marcus moved with every ounce of skill and experience he had gained in 50 years of violence. He used the terrain, the darkness, the confusion of the enemy. He turned their numbers against them, making them stumble over each other as they tried to corner him. But even with all his advantages, he was only one injured human against an army. Blows landed that he could not dodge. Wounds opened that he could not ignore. His vision began to blur, and his movements grew slower. Still, he fought on. Across the city, the human network struck at every critical point. Doors locked and unlocked according to a plan that only they understood. Weapons failed to fire at crucial moments. Vehicles carrying Varek's reinforcements found their navigation systems leading them in circles. It was not an army. It was 1,000 tiny rebellions working together as one. Every human who had ever been ignored or dismissed or treated as less than nothing now became a soldier in a war, fought with wrenches and axes, codes instead of guns and bombs. Varek's coup began to crumble before it had truly begun. In the palace corridors, Aserith and her guards fought their way toward the throne room. The young princess moved with a warrior's grace, wielding a blade that had been hidden beneath her ceremonial robes. She struck down 2 of Varek's soldiers who tried to block their path. "Your Highness," one of the guards gasped in surprise. "Where did you learn to fight like that?" "My guardian taught me," Aserith replied with fierce pride. "He said a princess should know how to defend herself." They reached the throne room and found the massive doors sealed shut. But a human maintenance worker emerged from a nearby access panel with a grin on her face. "I can get those open for you, Your Highness," she said. "Give me 30 seconds." The doors swung wide, and Aserith strode into the throne room to find Lord Varek waiting for her. He had abandoned the arena when the chaos began and had come here hoping to claim the throne before anyone could stop him. But he had found the dying Queen Malathris sitting upright in her chair of light with cold fury in her fading eyes. "Mother," Aserith cried as she rushed to the queen's side. "My daughter," Malathris whispered. "You came back to me. I knew you would." Varek drew his ceremonial blade and pointed it at them both. "It does not matter," he snarled. "The queen is dying, and you have no army. I have thousands of soldiers loyal to me. You cannot win." "Your soldiers are scattered and confused," Aserith replied. "Your communications are down, your reinforcements are lost, and your coup is failing. Surrender now, and I will show you mercy." "Mercy?" Varek laughed bitterly. "You offer mercy to the man who killed your father? To the man who has spent 20 years planning to take everything that should be mine? He lunged forward with his blade aimed at Acerith's heart, but a figure burst through a side door and intercepted the strike. Marcus Cole, covered in blood and barely able to stand, caught Varek's arm and twisted it until the blade clattered to the floor. "You should have made sure I was dead," Marcus growled as he drove his fist into Varek's face. The Lord crumpled to the ground, unconscious before he hit the floor. Marcus swayed on his feet, his vision fading. "Guardian!" Acerith cried as she caught him before he could fall. "Stay with me. You cannot leave me now." "Not going anywhere, kid," Marcus mumbled. "Just need to rest my eyes for a minute." He slipped into darkness with a smile on his battered face. 3 days later, Queen Malathris passed peacefully in her sleep with her daughter holding her hand. Her last words were a blessing for the future and a prayer that Acerith would rule with wisdom and compassion. The coronation ceremony took place 1 week after that, in the same throne room where Varek had tried to seize power. Acerith Val Kethos knelt before the assembled nobles of the Dominion and received the crown that was her birthright. But before she rose, she made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the galaxy. "I hereby create a new title," she declared. "The Guardian of the Throne, to be held by the one who has protected me and served our people with honor beyond measure. Commander Marcus Cole, step forward." Marcus walked slowly through the crowd, still healing from his wounds, but standing straight and proud. He knelt before the new queen and felt her place a medal around his neck. "Rise, Guardian," Acerith commanded. "You are the first human to hold noble rank in the history of the Valith Dominion. May you be the first of many." The crowd erupted in cheers, led by the humans who had come from across the city to witness this moment. In the months that followed, Queen Ezerith issued decree after decree recognizing humans as full citizens of the Dominion. Schools were opened where human and Valithi children learned side by side. Humans were appointed to positions of authority based on their skills rather than their species. And Lord Varek was exiled to the fringe worlds, sentenced to live among the lesser species he had despised for so long. 1 year after the coronation, Queen Ezerith addressed the Galactic Council for the first time. Representatives from 100 species watched as she spoke of unity and respect and the strength that came from diversity. And beside her stood Marcus Cole, gray-haired and scarred, wearing the simple uniform of a guardian rather than the elaborate robes of a noble. A young Valathi child in the audience tugged her mother's sleeve. "Why does everyone respect the small alien?" she asked. "He does not look very strong." Her mother looked at Marcus and smiled. "Because, little one, the humans taught us something we had forgotten," she replied. "True strength is not in how hard you can strike, but in how many times you can rise after falling." Marcus caught the child's eye and winked. Later that evening, he stood alone on a balcony overlooking the crystal spires of Cirith Prime. Acerith found him there, staring up at the stars with a peaceful expression on his weathered face. "What are you thinking about?" she asked as she joined him. "I was thinking about how strange life can be," he replied. 20 years ago, I was a broken soldier with nothing to live for. Then I found a starving alien girl on a backwater moon, and everything changed." Acerith took his hand and squeezed it gently. "You saved me," she said. "We saved each other," Marcus corrected. "That is how it works." They stood together in comfortable silence, the human guardian and his alien queen, looking out at a future brighter than either of them had ever dared to imagine. Somewhere in the palace below, a human child laughed and a Valathi child joined in. The sound drifted up to the balcony like a promise of better days to come. Marcus smiled and felt something warm bloom in his chest. This was what he had been fighting for all along. Not victory or glory or recognition, just this. A moment of peace, a family to protect, and a galaxy that was finally learning to see humans for what they truly were. Not weak, not primitive, just different. And absolutely utterly, wonderfully unstoppable.